In this lesson, we're going to be talking about conditional rendering. In React, you can create distinct components, then you can render only some of them depending on the state of your application. Let's test it. What I'm going to do is to go to src folder and create two components. The first one is user greeting.js. Inside that, just define a function, user greeting as a component, and a return heading 1, and it just says welcome back. Let's duplicate that and rename the second component to guest greeting. For guest greeting, rename user greeting to guest greeting, and at the end export default guest greeting. Do the same for user greeting. We need to export components to use them in other components like this. Okay, what we did is to create two different components. We are going to use one of them based on a condition in a parent component, in another component. So in the src, it's time to create a new file and set file name to greeting.js. Inside this component, define a function, set the name of it to greeting. This component accepts props. Inside that, we have an if condition. If props dot is logged in. It's a Boolean value that is coming from the parent component of greeting. If it's true, then here I'm going to use a conditional rendering. Return which component? The user greeting component. Use this style. User greeting and select this one which points to src/user greeting. It's gonna be imported automatically like this. If it's not true, user is not logged in, return guest greeting. Guest greeting, select this one to import it here. Don't forget, it should be like a component usage. Great. The greeting component needs to be exported. Export default greeting. And it's time to use it in the app component. Inside app, get rid of toggle button from previous lesson and use greeting. Press tab to import greeting from greeting.js here. And if we don't set anything, let's see what we get. I mean, we don't set any parameter, any attribute or props for greeting. Let's test the result. Refresh it. We are getting welcome back, but we shouldn't get welcome back. Let's see why. If we check the guest greeting, instead of welcome back, we need to show another message. Ask user to sign up. Sign up. That's it. Let's test the result. Here it says please sign up. What does it mean? It means that in the component we used greeting component, and inside greeting the props.isLoggedIn is undefined because we didn't set isLoggedIn in the greeting. When it's undefined, this component will be rendered. It's conditional rendering. And when this one rendered, this message will be shown on the screen. To use the useGreeting component inside app.js, we pass isLoggedIn as a property. Let's test it. This time we are getting welcome back. Also, we can explicitly set equal to true. Both of them works. But this one is more intuitive and easier and shorter. Great. So what we did is to use if condition to render components based on a condition in the parent element. Also, we can define element variables. Let's create two other components and see what does it mean. Inside src, click new file and set file name to login button.js. Inside this, define a login button component, and inside that return a button, and for onClick I'm going to call onClick on the parent component and close it and set it to login. Props is a parameter for login button component, and at the end we need to export default login button. Good. Let's go for logout button. Duplicate this and rename it to logout button. Inside that component, change login to logout here, here, and here. And that's it. We created another component named logout button. It's time to create a stateful component that uses these components, login and logout. Right click, new file, and set file name to login control.js. It's another component that use them. What I'm gonna do here is to create a class-based component. I can type class login component, or I can type RCC, which stands for React Class Component. If you install ES7 React Redux GraphQL React Native snippet, you will get this recommendation here by pressing RCC. Press tab. Can you see that? You have 11 lines of code, and it's the basics of a React class component for you instead of typing them manually. Let's define a constructor here that accepts props like always and call super props. After that, let's define state, and the default value for state is logged in, and by default it's false. We are going to define two methods. The first one is handle login click. I'm going to use this style for accessing to this object inside the handle click. Inside that, set state. When user click on that, on login click is logged in, should be true. Let's duplicate this code. I'm using Option Shift arrow down to duplicate that. After, select that part of code and change login to logout here and change it to false. When user click on logout button, this will run. Let's go for the render part. In the render part, I'm going to define an element variable. I'm using let instead of const because I'm going to update it, and set the name of element to button, and it doesn't have any value at first. And I'm gonna check state of is logged in. If it's true, the button is gonna be this component, a login button from src/login button. It's get imported automatically, and set onClick with capital C handler to this one. Copy this and paste it here and close the component. Also use this before the name of a method inside the class. Save it. The else part, very similar to this one. I'm going to copy and paste it, but change login to logout here and logout here. For logout button, you can press Control space to get the recommendation here, and by clicking on it, automatically import logout from /logout button will be added in line 3. In this line, we have the right button element. So in the return part, I'm gonna use the greeting component first from previous part, import it like this. As you see, I imported it here. And for the second one, I'm going to render button. Don't forget, you can render it like this because it's gonna be rendered like button in the screen, but we are going to render the right element because it's an JavaScript variable. We need to wrap it inside curly bracket. And for greeting, pass is login from state like this, is login equal to this value. Great. And for this if condition, if logged in is true, we need to show logout button, not login button. So I'm going to cut it from here, move it here, logout, and move login button to the else condition. Then go to the app.js and get rid of greeting here and import login control. We need to import it. Let's import login control from /login control. Let's test the result. We are getting please sign in. Click login. It says welcome back and it's logout. If we check the login control here, the is login as a state is true. If I click on it again, is login gets false. And can you check that? Greeting component login button, and by clicking on it, they are going to change to user greeting and logout button. It's conditional rendering. Great. Let's test inline if with logical and. Inside login control and in the return part, I'm going to use this condition if props dot has new message is a variable from props. If it's true, then I'm going to render this h2. You have unread messages, and it should be this.props because we are in class component. Great. Let's go to the app.js, and here, if we check the result, there is no change in the UI. But if in the app.js I pass parameter has new message and set it to true, what do I get? You have new messages. If the left part is true, then it render the right part. Otherwise, it doesn't render anything at all. Let's go for the second way, which is gonna be inline if else with conditional operator. Let's define another props, this.props.credit. If it's greater than 0, I'm using inline if else with conditional operator. Then I'm going to render h3 and enter this message you have, and enter this .props.credit credits. But what if it's false? I mean, this condition is false and credit is 0. I'm going to render another H3 and it says you have no credit, and save it to format your code. And let's check the results. We are getting you have no credit. Why do we get this? Because this.props.credit is undefined, and when it's undefined, it's not greater than 0, and then this condition gets true and it's going to be rendered on the screen. If we go to the app.js and set credit to, let's say, 100, don't forget to pass number, you need to wrap them inside curly bracket. You cannot use double quote. Save it. Good, you have 100 credits. That's it about inline if-else with conditional operator. As a last part of this lesson, I'm going to show you how you can prevent a component from rendering. Let's say in the login screen, I'm going to have another props. This props has warning. It shows warnings in the screen. If it's true, I'm going to render H4. You have warning. And if it's false, I'm going to show nothing. To show nothing, use null. Let's go to app.js and here refresh the page. You see nothing here because it's null. But if I set has warning to true, what do I get? I'm getting you have warning. So to prevent a component from rendering, you can use null as a return value for that component. Okay, that's it about this lesson. Let's review what we did in this lesson. This lesson was about conditional rendering. At the very beginning of this lesson, we created greeting component. And in the greeting component, if we have used an if condition, if the is logged in is true, we define separate component based on the props based on a condition from parent component. Also, we created logging control, and inside that, we have used element variables, and based on a condition, we set different React elements to React components to an element to a variable, and we have rendered that like this in the screen. Also, we tested logical and rendering, inline if-else rendering, and also preventing rendering an element using null. That's it about this lesson. Until next lesson, bye-bye.